Hey Dad, I was watching Star Trek earlier today, and I was wondering, how do you build a warp engine?
Okay, if you want to know how to build a warp engine, let's first talk about what a warp engine is. Now, the warp engine I have in mind would warp space using a gravitational vortex. A vortex is just a shape, like a whirlpool or a tornado. They happen all over in nature. Now, space is just made up of energy. In fact, there's enough energy in a piece of empty space, the size of my fingernail, to power a city. But not all space is equal. Some space has more energy in it than other space. And gravity is the way we perceive these differences in the energy of space. Now, massive objects like the Earth lower the energy of the space that they inhabit. So imagine us sitting here on the surface of the Earth. The space above me has more energy than the space below me. Now, the second law of thermodynamics says that energy travels from high to low. This is what we experience as the force of gravity. It's like an airplane wing. As an airplane wing moves through the air above the wing becomes a lower pressure than the air below the wing. This difference in pressure is what gives an airplane wing lift. So the warp engine would actually cause a whirlpool in space, causing the space to move from one side of the engine to the other. This lowers the energy of space on one side and raises the space on the other side, causing its own gravity. But it's in whatever direction you point it. Okay, so let's talk about how to actually build a warp engine. The things you're going to need, first off, would be a plasma chamber. It should be shaped like a donut or a torus, and it should be able to fit 8 spheres neatly inside of it. Next, we need some warp plasma, and certainly sounds exotic, but you can find plasma inside any fluorescent light. It's usually a small amount of mercury vapor mixed with inert argon gas. Now, to turn that gas into plasma, you need an exciter circuit. Now, as a reminder, plasma is matter that has been so energized that the electrons are stripped away from the nucleus of the atom. So you end up with electrons and atom nucleuses just floating around in a soup of plasma. So what the exciter circuit does is it floods the plasma chamber with free-floating electrons that strip the electrons off the nucleus of the mercury atoms, thus plasma. Now, where a fluorescent light would have one exciter circuit, this engine would actually have 8 exciter circuits evenly spaced around the plasma chamber. Next, you need a warp coil, which is actually a Roden coil, which is a special type of electrical coil designed by a guy named Marco Roden. Now, this coil is wrapped around the plasma chamber in a way that you can adjust the orientation to your exciter circuits, kind of like setting the timing on an internal combustion engine. Next, you need a waveform generator, or just a computer. Now, this thing doesn't run off of simple DC or AC power, but intricate fractal energy patterns. You would need to sense the state of the engine so that it could compute waveforms for both the warp coil and the exciter circuits so that everything worked as one unified piece. And the last thing you would need is an amplifier to power the warp coil. Okay, so what does this thing look like when it's running, and how do you get it started? I think the best analogy is an AC electric motor. Now, electric motor has a stator, which is the electrical coils on the outside that don't move, and the rotor, which is connected to whatever you want to put power to. And they call it a rotor because it rotates. So the stator would be your warp coil, and the rotor is the warp plasma. Since the plasma has mass, it affects the space it inhabits. And that's what you're trying to put the power into. The goal is to move space. So the electric field caused by the warp coil pushes the plasma, and the space gets drug along. So you got to get that plasma moving. So let's look at the fluorescent light again. The light bulb runs off of AC power, so it causes the electrons in the plasma to flow back and forth as the voltage changes. So the exciter circuit is already causing movement inside the plasma. The warp coil can then direct the plasma into a spiral, twisty rotation. This rotation causes a gravity wave piggybacked on an electromagnetic field, which would be called a warp field. It has the ability to push space around because of its very specific waveform. Think about a speck of dust in the air getting hit by sound waves. With a simple sine wave, the wave would first push it this way, and then the wave would push it back this way. And there's a delay where the momentum of the dust speck keeps it moving until the wave can slow it down, stop it, and push it back the other way. Now imagine a wave that would push the dust speck this way, and then before the momentum could be lost, would jump back and continue to push the dust speck. Instead of just moving back and forth, that dust speck would speed up, slow down, but it would keep constant direction. Okay, so how do you start this thing? Well, you have two circuits you have to power. All right, the warp circuit and the exciter circuit. The warp circuit is a computer-controlled feedback loop. You know, like when you get a microphone and a speaker too close to each other and you get the feedback and it just kind of like starts shrieking? Well, that, except it's controlled by a computer, so it's limited and can be controlled. The next is the exciter circuit. It will have the same frequency as the warp circuit, but it will have a different waveform, which could be as simple as a simple sine wave. So to start it up, you hit the thing with a simple AC blunt instrument. It's like hitting a bell with a hammer and then listening to it ring. The ringing is the bell's resonant frequency, and this is what you would replace your simple AC with to cause your feedback loop. So if you can get that built and you figure out your waveforms and your frequencies, then you'll be off to where no man has gone before.